Welcome to Canning Conversations this morning. This morning I'm joined by Paige Boyle. She's the Presidential Doctoral Research Fellow in the Department of Plant, Soil, and Climate at Utah State University. Paige, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, Paige is here to talk to us a little bit about some alternative lawn care and some alternative lawn options. Paige, tell us what some alternative lawn options are that we could be doing this fall.
Yeah, so something that I'm probably going to focus on a little bit more is kind of flowering lawns. That's kind of a new trend in the turfgrass industry right now, is how can we add some of these kind of ecosystem services back into turf, which already serve a lot of ecosystem services, but what else can we do with that? And so we have these really large expanses of turfgrass out there. You know, everyone has a yard, and it's a really big area, especially for pollinator habitat, that we could be benefiting from.
Absolutely, yeah, and I know so many pollinators are struggling, and we have that space. Why not utilize it better? So what are some ways that we can do that?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of research recently, especially at the University of Arkansas, where I did my master's and my undergrad. They just did a big study looking at bulbs in lawns. So you can actually plant some of these shorter growing bulbs in your yard, and they come up in early spring. So usually a little bit before the turf greens up here in Utah. And so it's an early season forage source for a lot of these pollinators right after kind of the cold winter, and they come out when it's, you know, on those random warm days that we might get. Yeah, so things like crocus species are a little bit shorter. Those are a really great option. Muscari or grape hyacinth, I actually see that a lot around here, so I know it does well.
Awesome.
Some spring beauty or claytonia can also do really well mixed in with turf. So those are some options as far as bulbs go.
So just plant them right in your grass where you want them, those bulbs.
Yeah, so you can either, you know, just punch some holes in your grass and put the bulbs in. If you're starting a new lawn, you can sod over the bulbs. So put the bulbs down into the soil, sod over, and they actually come up okay. The first year might be a little sparse, but the second year it seems like they come up pretty well. Probably the easiest method, though, into an existing lawn is just punch some holes in and plant the bulbs that way.
It'd be a great way to add some color and some pop to your lawn for sure, too.
Yeah.
So if you do this and you're caring for your lawn, what about mowing and stuff? Can you mow over these bulbs or?
Yeah, that's the nice thing about specifically doing some of these shorter bulbs, is that they do kind of persist if you raise your mowing height a little bit. So I would raise it up a bit if you could. But most of the time, these are going to be kind of come and gone before the turf actually greens up, before you have to get to mowing. So that's
we have to start mowing.
Yeah.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, what other ideas do you have to share with us this morning, Paige?
Yeah, so my actual research is focusing on different clovers that you can include in lawns. So I'm looking at white clover, which is kind of pretty common, strawberry clover, which we actually see a lot of kind of just randomly around here in Logan. If you look on the side of the sidewalk or something, if you see those little pink flowers or these little kind of white puffballs, is what the strawberry.
Yeah, I do see those a lot.
Yeah, so we know it does well here. I'm testing that as one of my options. I'm also looking at crimson clover and rose clover, which is actually pretty drought tolerant. And so some of those are some options. You might have to modify your management a little bit with legumes. They do add nitrogen to the soil, so you don't have to fertilize as much, which is really nice.
That's nice.
But the alternative is that because these are broadleaves, you can't spray herbicides for the most part, because it will kill either your grass or your clover, depending on what you're spraying.
Awesome. Well, I imagine those clovers are also great for pollinators as well. Is that true?
Yeah, the white clover and the strawberry clover especially are really great for pollinators. And depending on kind of how they do, this year it's a little, my stands are a little sad, but last year, I mean, they were blooming for months. And so that's kind of the nice thing. The bulbs you get, you know, early spring forage for these pollinators. The clovers you get kind of a longer extended period with those.
So if you kind of mix and match maybe some bulbs and some clovers, you could kind of have a longer foraging season for some of our pollinators.
Potentially. There's not a lot of research looking at those mixtures,
Mm-hmm.
but potentially that could be the case. And one thing to kind of keep in mind is that you don't have to do the entire yard. You can kind of select areas that maybe aren't in use as much, because with these clovers, they aren't necessarily as tolerant to, you know, your kids going out to play or your dog running around. So if you have some areas that are, you know, less in use, that might be a good area to transition some of this.
Yeah, I think that's probably true for a lot of people. I think a lot of us have large yards that we maybe only use a part of. So that's a great idea to take some of those areas that we don't use quite so much and use some of these clovers and bulbs to make some more habitat for pollinators.
Yeah, and I guess one thing to keep in mind though is that if you do have an area that, you know, your dog is going out, or you have young kids, or you're allergic to bees, maybe these aren't the options for you, or maybe just kind of keep them away from, again, those areas that are higher use, because there is the potential there for, you know, bees are going to be there, and although bees generally aren't super aggressive, you know, if you're trampling around, you know, you might have some issues there.
Absolutely, yeah, that's a great thing to consider. What about water usage for clovers and bulbs? Are they any more water efficient than our typical lawn?
The nice thing about the bulbs is that they're going to come up, you know, when we're getting that kind of snow melt, so you don't really have to water those. The clovers, it's still kind of up in the air. It depends on what species you're using. I'm irrigating my plots just because it's a research plot and, you know, we have to. But again, if you look around town and you see these clovers that are persisting a little bit better than the grass in a lot of cases, that kind of seems to indicate that there might be a little bit more drought tolerance. You might be able to reduce your water a little bit. And also, kind of the nice thing of having these mixed stands is that if the grass kind of gets a little bit stressed, you still have some green cover there if the clover is able to persist. So you might see some fluctuations over the season or over the years just based on environmental conditions, but you're maintaining some green cover. Either, you know, the grass is happy and the clover might be a little sad, or vice versa. But that's better than having, you know, dormant grass all summer or something like that. So.
Yeah, definitely, and probably a great way to get some diversity, keep your yard looking healthy year round, depending on, like you said, whether it's the grass or the clovers that are doing well at that time.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Did you have any other ideas to share with us?
Yeah, there are some other kind of less maybe popular options. Henbit, I know it's a really big weed in turf. A lot of people don't like it, but it makes a really nice ground cover. Same thing with yarrow. Black medic is all over my plots. It's doing really well this year. And again, it's considered a weed, but it is a legume, and it's adding, you know, nitrogen back to the soil. It's persisting in these turf stands. It's good for pollinators, so it is an option. Some research up in Minnesota has looked at things like ground plum and creeping thyme, and those actually do really well mixed in with some of these cool season turfs, which is a lot of what we grow here. So those are some options. English daisy can persist, and it has these really tiny little white, pink, or red flowers. So that could be a really great option. So I guess it just kind of depends on what your visual preference is and kind of what your goal is.
Yeah, what you want it to look like and what you're trying to meet. So I'm curious what your take is. I feel like oftentimes we consider things weeds that we've been taught they're weeds. So are some of these things that you're saying that sometimes we consider weeds really weeds if they make great ground cover and a good alternative?
I guess it depends on who you talk to. There's a common saying is the whole, you know, a weed is just a plant that's somewhere where it's not wanted. That's kind of debatable, but yeah, I mean, if you're going in and intentionally planting clover with the purpose of adding, you know, these ecosystem services for pollinator habitat and nitrogen and carbon sequestration and all of this, I wouldn't consider that a weed. But that's just me.
I don't think I would either. I think that's a great way to maybe look at some potential great uses for some of these plants that we probably overlook.
Yeah, and they can be really beautiful, and you know, we're just so conditioned to think of lawns as, you know, it has to be this dark green, perfect manicured system, but that requires a lot of input in a lot of cases. And so if you can kind of reduce that a little bit, it's better for the environment. It can be a little bit cheaper. So there's definitely benefits to it all.
Wonderful. So I'm curious about a little bit the care side. What are some of the advantages if you do some of these things as far as taking care of your turf and whatever options you use? Does it make it a little bit easier on the care side of things?
It can, because again, if you're going in and you're planting, say, a clover, you have that clover and that grass. So again, they're filling different requirements for the ecosystem. Of course, you aren't going to be able to spray herbicide, but something that I'm looking at is, okay, you're planting these broadleaf, basically what we would consider a weed, but you're doing it intentionally. So can it help prevent other weeds from coming up because you're getting those broadleafs in there? So verdict's still out on that for a while, but that's kind of the idea. All these legumes that you might be planting can add nitrogen, can add carbon. You're adding a lot of biomass in there, so a lot of that's going to accumulate in the soil, which is really important here where we don't have a lot of organic matter in the soil because it's so hot. So you're getting a lot of those benefits. It is potentially going to make, again, those herbicide applications, you won't be able to spray some of these other weeds unless you do it selectively. But I think most of the time the benefits kind of outweigh some of that.
Absolutely.
You might have to raise your mowing height a little bit, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. You might have to mow a little less.
Yeah. The less we can mow, I think the happier we all will be.
Right.
Yeah. So it sounds like in essence, adding in some of these different elements to our turf really can just create a whole ecosystem that's much better balanced than just your typical dark green lush lawns that I think we want to see.
Idea. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they can be really pretty too if you choose something that kind of appeals to you.
I bet they can. Yeah, I get some beautiful colors and things in there. I'm sure they can be quite lovely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, tell me, what else are you researching? Do you have anything else you'd like to share research-wise? I know you're doing a lot of research with clovers, which you shared a little bit of.
Yeah, that's my main study right now. So I'm looking at the 4 clovers, and then half of my plots are getting some fertilizer. So we are seeing if fertilizer, because in a lot of cases, if you fertilize a clover, you might reduce the clover in that stand because it's not as competitive. So we are testing that. Again, we're looking at the weeds aspect of it, but that's kind of my main project. I have a couple little side projects, but those are still kind of up in the air right now with COVID going on. So
yeah, everything's up in the air a little bit.
Yeah.
So tell me, I don't know if you've done any research on this or if you've just personally noticed, we've talked a lot about the benefits to pollinators for some of these. Have you been able to compare like the number of pollinators that you get to patch with clovers or both versus just your normal turf lawn?
Right. I haven't personally been looking at pollinators just because that's not my area of expertise. But I do have a colleague at University of Arkansas who I worked with when we were both doing our master's research there. And she did look at pollinator counts with things like strawberry clover, white clovers, English daisy, some of these other bird's foot trefoil, henbit, or heel-all. And she did see that there were differences in pollinator activity, but there wasn't any direct comparison to turf plots. But I think the idea there is just that you are probably getting a lot more pollinators because there are flowers that they can use for resources.
I would imagine so, yeah. You're giving them those flowers to attract them.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So for our viewers that are looking to kind of start incorporating some of these ideas into their lawn, what's the best way for them to start, and where's a good place to get some of this information?
Yeah, so the University of Minnesota, like I said, has done a lot of this research already. And so they actually just fairly recently launched kind of a, what's it called? Lawns to Legumes initiative. So they have a lot of resources. So if you just type in University of Minnesota Extension, bee lawns or flowering lawns into your search bar, they have a lot of resources. I actually am just about to have a publication on this come out in the next couple weeks, hopefully. about that study back in Arkansas, looking at some of the different clovers and things. So if that's something that people are interested in, they can email me for a copy. I'm happy to send that out. Yeah, I think probably the best place to look is just kind of figure out, look up your local extension, see what will work here. Reach out to your extension agents, your local extension agents, and kind of have a chat with them, or people can email me directly and we can figure something out.
Yeah, utilize these resources locally we have.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't necessarily rely on the extension services, which, I mean, that's the purpose of having the extension there. Yeah, so definitely don't hesitate to reach out to your extension. Yeah, and I think probably the biggest thing is maybe just look up some pictures, see what you might like, and kind of go from there.
Awesome. Did you have any pictures you wanted to share with us today?
Yeah, let's see if I can. Oh, looks like I can't share my screen.
I'm not going to screen share. Let me see if I need to give you permission.
Let's see.
All right.
Can you see that?
Yes, we can see that now. Awesome.
All right, so these are some of those bulbs. So this is the Spring Beauty. Has these really small white flowers that can be really pretty when they're planted pretty densely. This is that Grape hyacinth, which actually is really, really pretty. We see a lot of it here.
Nice pop.
Yeah, a little pop of color there.
Yeah.
Some of these crocuses, they come in, dark purple, light purple. They have, we tested one of these cream and these dark yellow ones. So there's a wide variety of colors there. Of course, most people know what white clover looks like. This is that strawberry clover, those little, slightly smaller than the white clover flowers that come in more of a pink color. The crimson clover is a little bit lighter in color as far as the leaves, but it makes these really beautiful dark red flowers. It is a little bit taller, so you'd need to raise your mowing height probably a little bit on this one.
Raise those lawn decks a little bit more.
Yeah. Rose clover, this is one of my favorites. It gets these really pretty kind of red leaves. Kind of watermarks is what we call them.
That's a beautiful color.
Yeah, and it actually is really nice because it's a little bit lower growing, so it blends a little bit better with the turf. It doesn't overpower the turf.
Stand out as taller than the turf. Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah.
And then some of these just regular forbs. So we have the henbit, which again, a lot of people just consider a weed, but if
I think that looks beautiful. Like that looks like a nice, healthy lawn covering on that house.
Yeah, some pretty little purple flowers that look really nice when they're planted in mass. Heal all or self-heal, really great for pollinators. Can also get a little bit tall and might be a little aggressive for a lot of the turf species, but potentially an option. And then again, the English daisy, you get these white to light pink to red flowers, a little bit more clumpy in distribution, but can still be really pretty.
Yeah. So I think it really does depend on like what you prefer visually. It looks like so many options as far as what they look like and how you could plant them and use them.
Right. And definitely check if pollinators are something that you're worried about or that you want to help support. Make sure that whatever you're planting actually supports pollinators. The bulb study that my colleague Michelle Wisdom did back at Arkansas, she planted other bulbs that weren't quite as attractive to pollinators, she found out. So things like narcissus or daffodils. So just make sure that if that is something that you're kind of
if that's what you're looking to attract and want to see.
Just make sure that what you're planting is a good resource for pollinators, because not all flowers are. So
fantastic. Well, I know a lot of people, me included, sometimes think of spring as planting time. Is there anything they can be planting or doing this fall as far as these alternative lawn covers?
Yeah, definitely. The bulbs, of course, can go in before it gets cold, so that they can kind of overwinter and come up in the spring. Same thing with the clovers. You can do, if you really want clover for this fall, I would go ahead and plant maybe in the next couple weeks. Scalp your turf down if it's existing, so lower the height a little bit on it, sprinkle in some clover seed. It may come up depending on the weather. Who knows what's going to happen. The weather here can be pretty crazy.
It can.
But you can also do a dormant seeding in the winter. So after the soil gets down to about 40 degrees is probably a good time to go out, put some clover seed out. It'll overwinter and then come up first thing in the spring. So that's a great option. So yeah, now's a fine time to plant some of this stuff.
Awesome. Yeah, not a bad time to prep your lawn or your lawn covering for fall or for spring.
Yeah, definitely.
Prepare for some beautiful things to come up this spring.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Paige, I appreciate you joining us so much, and I hope people are able to take advantage of this. I know I'm definitely excited and hope to be able to try some of this stuff out. Is there anything else you wanted to share with us before I let you go?
No, like I said, if people have any questions, they can email me. My email's up here on the screen, and always happy to talk clovers and lawns and whatever else. So
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Paige. Have a great weekend.
You too. Thanks.
Thanks. Bye-bye.